Dear participant, welcome to the first module of the Fostering Resilience in Rural Communities course, co-founded by the Erasmus Plus program in the context of REBOUND. My name is Alistair Adam Hernandez and I am your lecturer for the first week, touching on the key concepts. I am a rural development practitioner and academic who wrote his PhD about the resilience of communities in rural and peripheral areas of Europe. I'm excited to meet you next week during the first tutorial, clarifying your questions and discussing the key concepts presented during this first session. So don't hesitate to write questions, reflections, and whatever you think is worth asking or discussing. At this point, you might think that the following minutes will be about exploring dry subjects, but I promise to do my best and make it a little entertaining. The content of this module delivers a solid theoretical foundation on which you will be able to build upon while the course and its contents progress towards the end. So let us have a look at our module's content outline. First of all, we are going to start contextualizing rural areas in the European Union and the diversity of their challenges. Then we're going to dive deep into the concept of resilience, looking at it from different perspectives, understanding its origin, its application in the context of rural development. Then we're going to look at three concepts which are somehow related to resilience. Those are neo-endogenous development, community-led local development, formerly known as the leader approach, and social innovation. After that, we are going to present the assignment from this week 1 and prepare you for the first tutorial happening on the 20th of September at 18 hours Central European Summertime. Let us start putting the topic of rural community resilience into spatial context. Let's talk about rural areas in the European Union, their delimitation, their diversity, and their challenges. In terms of population, the importance of rural areas in the European Union becomes quickly clear. Just over a quarter of the EU 28 population lived in rural areas in 2015. Around further 31% lived in towns and suburbs with some degree of rurality, and the rest, 40%, lived in cities. This last available data from Eurostat still includes the United Kingdom before Brexit. Looking at the map on the left-hand side of the slide, it is easy to appreciate how inside each member state there is a diversity of rural, intermediate, and urban regions. It might seem obvious for you, someone with experience and strong relationships to rural development topics, but in my opinion it is important to acknowledge every now and again that rural Europe obviously has commonalities, but it is diverse and has specific characteristics and challenges in each region. Let's have a look at some specific challenges. For example, the quality of public services. In EU jargon, we also define them as services of general interest, or SGIs, which can be subdivided in social and economic services of general interest. The first meaning education, health, elderly, or childcare, and the second referring to ICT infrastructure, transport, or public finance. As you can see on the map, some member states deliver a homogeneous picture, but in many others there is a mixture of areas which are developing positively or negatively in both kinds of public services, or even diverging developments with improvements in social public services and worsenings in economic services. The concept of resilience has a lot to do with how a system, in this case rural areas or rural communities, overcome challenges. That is why we are spending some time looking into the specific challenges affecting them. A very good and recent source summarizing challenges in rural Europe has been published by the Scientific Service of the EU Commission in 2021. The following chart shows a good summary. As you can read starting in the upper left corner, demographics play a very important role, with depopulation, generational renewal, aging, and gender disparities as main outcomes. But also economic issues affecting incomes, jobs, or business creation. Even social issues like quality of life and the evolution of social rights and vulnerable population are of relevance. Take a look at this publication during your self-guided learning assignment. But how does the EU want to tackle this wide array of challenges affecting the countryside? That is where, among others, so-called policy frameworks come into play. As an overarching policy framework and commitment of the EU Commission's President, Ursula von der Leyen, the EU developed the long-term vision for rural areas, which explicitly formulates the commitment to develop more socially and environmentally resilient rural areas. You will learn more about policy frameworks and structures in Module 3, delivered by Ursula Bucic-Tabor. Let's move on to the concept of resilience and its application to rural areas and/or rural communities. Let's start with the concepts or the word's origin, its etymology. Resilience is a word that comes from Latin, resilio, or in its present infinitive resilire, and it means to leap or spring back, rebound, recoil, retreat, and a number of further options. That is why we called the project REBOUND. As you can see in this graph from the Collins English Dictionary, the concept has been growing in popularity. It is used by many different scientific disciplines and also practices, everyone with their own perspective and slightly different nuances, which produces a number of confusions. We propose in this course to interpret resilience not only as the capacity to bounce back, but also maybe the possibility to bounce forward. What we mean with this will be revealed in the coming slides. The popularity of resilience seems to have been growing in parallel to the number of societal challenges and multiple crises on the globe. Resilience as a concept can help to conceptualize, to understand how different systems of reference, maybe a group of people, a country or a region or an ecosystem, can respond to a challenge and in the best case overcome it. I think the pictures on this slide speak for themselves. Climate change, refugees, environmental pollution, wars, pandemics or natural disasters are as present as ever in the media. Resilience appears often as a way to understand how systems react to these menacing processes of change. But boiling down the components of this concept, I came up with the resilience framework from the UK Foreign Aid Agency and adapted it with the state of the art in the literature. I think it helps a lot to understand resilience. You can pose three main questions to use resilience as a conceptual tool for your own purposes. First of all, we ask, what is resilient? There we focus on our system of reference and we draw a line making a difference from what is our system and what is its context. It is especially important to achieve a consensus with our fellows on what system we are exactly talking about. Then we focus on the disruption, the shock or the stress which our system is undergoing and ask ourselves, against what is it resilient? Understanding the nature and the characteristics of the disruptions will inform our capacity to react to them. And depending on our exposedness, sensitivity, and adaptiveness, our system will react one way or another. It might collapse or recover as a damaged system. It might bounce back to its original position. Or, as we commented in previous slides, it might be stronger. It might bounce forward. This is the third question. Now we can ask ourselves, how does the system really react? And more important, by what means does it show its resilience? You might want to reflect here on how you define a successful reaction to the disruption or crisis your system has undergone. When discussing the resilience of a specific system, try applying these main questions to create a clearer picture and making things easier. Let us take a break for a short reflection. Take some minutes to write down some ideas about what you have heard about resilience up to now. These questions can guide you and initiate your thinking. What did resilience as a concept mean before you started this course? Has that now changed? Considering the challenges described in the introduction, how do rural communities manifest or develop their resilience in your opinion? See you again in a few minutes. Let's try to apply the concept of resilience to a rural community using an example. First of all, what is resilient? Let's use the imaginary community of Wetwood. First of all, we would like to achieve a consensus on what specifically we are looking at. Do we mean Wetwood as a village, a municipality with different localities, or do we maybe want to consider Wetwood a whole ecosystem with its economic, environmental, and social spheres? I'd say let us focus specifically on the people of Wetwood and focusing on the civic sphere. Second question, against what is it resilience? We could talk about or we could analyze The reaction of Wetwood to the COVID-19 pandemic, a shock that started in 2020, to which the community reacted somehow. Here are some examples. For example, parish council and community groups teamed up to start a food bank. The churches, associations invested in restarting community gardens, or volunteers visit elderly people on a weekly basis to bring them groceries and meds. Those are three examples of how very specifically this community reacted to that challenge, to that crisis. By what means does it show its resilience? Here we could evaluate how the quality of life of the people in Wetwood was kept through these specific measures. After putting resilience into the practice of rural community development in more of a simple way, it is now time to dig a bit deeper. In the context of REBOUND, we spent some time developing a working definition on rural community resilience. You can read this on the slide, but I'm not going to read it out loud. I would like to stress 6 very important messages. First of all, resilience and rural community resilience is a capacity. You can become more capable. Our goal is to empower you to increase and enhance the resilience of your communities. Resilience has multiple meanings and nuances, and you will soon understand them all. Reacting and adapting also depends strongly on the challenges and the context you're working in. Rural community resilience has a lot to do with governance, and steering towards more resilience in rural communities involves multiple stakeholders. It is about maintaining, improving quality of life and well-being in challenging times. And last of all, it's about you and me, but especially it's about us. It's about networks, cooperation, and collective empowerment. Our working definition of rural community resilience also makes reference to different approaches or ways of interpreting the concept itself, the so-called equilibrium or evolutionary approaches or understandings of resilience. What does that mean exactly? Well, as said, resilience is a slippery and a bit of a fuzzy concept. You have probably noticed that it can be applied in different ways. One understanding of resilience belonging to the equilibrium approach is the capacity of a rural community to cope, withstand, or even resist change. In other words, a somewhat robust community. In terms of withstanding a sudden crisis and disruptions, this interpretation can be helpful. But what about ongoing processes of change like climate or demographic change? The adaptability of our community is in demand to tackle those challenges. This is a first understanding of the so-called evolutionary approach. The second one is understanding resilience as the community capacity to shape or enable change. This could also be translated as the transformational capacity of the community. A much more profound approach to changing behaviors, practices, and rules in and around the community. When a rural community starts up a self-owned energy cooperative and delivers renewable green energy to the majority of households in the village, they will have transformed their electricity supply. As you may have noticed, the nuances, the interpretations of resilience as a concept are varied and range between resistance and transformability, which can be transferred to how a community tackles their challenges. But being more specific now, what is exactly responsible for the robustness, adaptiveness, or transformational capacity of a rural community? Answering this question is not very easy or straightforward. A number of factors exist that may enable, foster, or hinder, avoid rural community resilience. During the setup phase of REBOUND, we did some empirical research and asked around 60 experts in different European countries about enabling and hindering factors to rural community resilience. As most relevant factors, our experts answered that community-level action and networks, as well as social capital and community leadership, were the most important. As less relevant, they pointed out the diversity of groups, social and cultural, as well as community agency networks and good public services and infrastructure. As you can read on page 7 of our report, resilience is often related to the achievement of a higher degree of independence or preparedness, as well as to a higher level of awareness, engagement, community spirit, and self-organizing of citizens in collective affairs. On the other side, the negative side of things, Our experts rated different kinds of barriers and came to the overall conclusion that local people that are not activated or interested in their locality represent the highest barrier to building resilience. Also, the preventing or uninterested role of policymakers was admonished. Respondents are clear on the need for an emphasis on the community, on local voices, people, and on supporting local actions and participation. We asked a number of other questions you can check in the report on our website. We will be revealing more of these factors and going individually into detail throughout the course and during the different modules. Well, that was our short theoretical introduction to the concept of rural community resilience. Remember, this is a firm foundation for the whole course, and you will be deepening its possibilities and meanings throughout the coming modules, also in relation to other concepts, approaches, and many examples. Please take some time to deepen your knowledge reading this very recommended report in English. It's called Exploring Community Resilience. What is it? How are people building it? And why does it matter? It was published by the Carnegie Trust in the UK. Now let us move to our next chapter. Neo-endogenous development? If you have never heard about the topic, you might be thinking, what on earth does this have to do with rural communities? But no worries, it is easier than you may think. I suppose we agree that building resilience in a rural community is an issue of development, of where the community is now standing and where and how it would like to be in the future. What pathway and strategy might it choose to get there? That is why reflecting on the way we understand rural development processes is very relevant. So let us have a look into some concepts of development which have been evolving in the past decades. Until approximately the 1980s, rural development in Europe was understood as exogenous development. According to this model, the main forces of progress, the drivers of change, are conceived as being outside rural areas and communities, like industrialization or technological change. Somewhere around the beginning of the 1990s, a new model emphasizing the realization of the endogenous potential arises, focusing on natural, human assets and local knowledge. During the decade of the 2000s, scholars and practitioners shifted their views towards a combination, or let's say, acknowledging the coexistence of both drivers, and baptized this as neo-endogenous development. This approach to explaining development stresses local resources and participation, but is also characterized by dynamic interactions between communities and their wider environments. It recognizes the importance of promoting local and extra-local connections that strengthen the terms on which local people deal with the outside world. A good summary of the principles, drivers, etc. of the three development lenses is given by the following table. As you can see in the right bottom corner, it conceptualizes rural development as a holistic approach to include local empowerment, capacity building, overcoming exclusion, adding value to local resources, enhancing connectivity, and promoting innovation. You are now asking yourself what this finally has to do with rural community resilience. Well, we consider that strengthening a networked kind of development where local communities cooperate with different types of actors like companies, public organizations, and educational institutes is conducive or helps to build resilience. It's about setting up collaborations inside the community but also outside of it, reaching to others who might be helpful and up for the complex tasks the community wants to accomplish. This is what is also called a multiple or quadruple helix approach and can enable social innovations. Those are two further concepts we will be picking up throughout the course. You might have already guessed. After introducing top-down, bottom-up, and neo-endogenous development, the moment has come to illustrate the leader approach. In my opinion, the most significant example of bottom-up policy and implementation of a funding and development program in the European Union since its beginnings in the early 1990s. Obviously, practicing the bottom-up approach promoted by LEADER, you tend to realize that neo-endogenous is what mostly is really happening. Stimuli, initiatives, and forces from the top and from the bottom meet in a somewhat messy middle, with hopefully positive results for happy local communities and proud policymakers. Since the last funding period, the leader approach, originally to be found only in the context of the European Agricultural Fund for Rural Development, was made available as a method, as a way of working with stakeholders and funds, as I say, was made available to other funds like the European Fund for Regional Development or the European Social Fund, which means that it was available not only for rural but also for coastal and urban areas. LEADER is in its origin a French acronym meaning linkages between actions to develop the rural economy, so it already makes reference to its collaborative approach to development. Furthermore, it has three key components. First, it is an area-based approach and pretends to design and implement tailor-made interventions that make sense in that one specific territory, not just putting into practice what has been decided hundreds or thousands of kilometers away in an office. Second, to do this, a coherent and mid-term strategy has to be developed and decided by people and organizations belonging to the area. What wants to be achieved has to be followed by how it should be achieved, stressing what focus areas and emphasizing what kind of measures exactly should be tackled. Third, this can only be achieved and legitimized by a partnership of public, private, and civic organizations or groups. The partnership has been traditionally called the Local Action Group, the LAG, using the acronym in short. And exactly this structure required to implement CLLD, Community-Led Local Development, is the main difference of the LEADER approach in comparison to traditional funding programs. Traditionally, an EU funding program is implemented at the state or regional level by a managing authority, for example a ministry, which includes the so-called paying agency that eventually pays for funded projects after checking reports and where used lists. This happens directly paying to the project promoters. The CLLD approach includes the LAG as an intermediary agent, built by the local partnership and ensuring that funds and projects are in line with the aforementioned development strategy. If you are familiar with LEADER, you might know these principles like the Lord's Prayer of bottom-up rural development. We heard already about its area and partnership-based nature and contribution to decentralizing the tasks of managing authorities, but it is also important to remember that the bottom-up approach should ensure that local people can participate and make decisions about strategic and practical issues. It pursues integrated, multi-sectoral, and predominantly innovative projects. And last but not least, it emphasizes the collaborative, networked, and learning approach in development. A short summary of LEADER or CLLD and the development of its policy framework closes this chapter. From 1991 to 1999, it was only used in rural areas as an initiative of the EU Commission. Since the 2000s, it has been integrated in the European Agricultural Fund for Rural Development, EAFRD. Since 2007, also available in fisheries areas, and since 2014 in all types of areas, using different kinds of EU funds, but it's only mandatory for the EAFRD. Nowadays, it's possible to combine several funds in one local strategy and apply the so-called multi-fund approach. The LEADER approach has been a real laboratory of participative and sustainable rural development in the past decades. As we stressed in the previous slides, it is not only a funding program for rural communities and areas, it is above all a way of doing things. It's an approach to territorial and community development. This different way of doing things that LEADER promotes invests, among other things, in reconfiguring social practices, responding to societal challenges, engaging with local civic society actors, and achieving enhanced well-being. This is what predominantly in the last decade has been baptized and conceptualized as social innovations, to distinguish them from classic approaches to innovation with an exclusive market and technological background. As said up to now, resilience helps us to understand how any system, in our case a rural community, is capable of withstanding, adapting or transforming in the face of different challenges affecting them. The concept of social innovation helps us to understand how a community as a social system, built by its individuals, organizations, behaviors, and rules of cohesion, creates new ideas, collaborations, and arrangements to meet their needs in the face of challenges. Social innovation is also a contested concept and has overlaps with a number of other theories and concepts like shown in this graph. For example, innovation systems, regional development theory, social entrepreneurship, transition theory, and many others. Also resilience. This graph is slightly adapted from Lukács and others, a paper which I very much recommend to read. But what definitions can we find of social innovation? A general definition from the EU Commission goes as follows. Social innovations are new ideas that meet social needs, create social relationships, and form new collaborations. These innovations can be products, services, or models addressing unmet needs more effectively. A more specific definition from the Alpine Space Social Innovation Strategy that stresses their collaborative approach and their impact goes as follows. A new answer to social needs or societal challenges, regardless of the nature of innovation, through a collaborative approach that involves beneficiaries, users, and affected stakeholders, and has a positive, sustainable, and measurable impact. I must admit that social innovations at this point might still seem a bit vague. So let's watch two videos with impressive and also moving stories involving social innovations from Lebanon and Norway, courtesy of the European Horizon Project CIMRA on social innovations in rural areas. Now pause this video and switch to the PDF slides of Module 1. The videos should be linked in them, and you just have to click on the video's picture for them to pop up and start in your browser. See you back here in a few minutes. I hope you enjoyed those two examples. In Lebanon, the potential economic impact of a social innovation becomes clear. In Norway, it's about empowering people and contributing to their well-being by intervening in an intelligent way and trying to change their behavior. So remember to get out and about this weekend. Trying to summarize what is of special importance in the conceptual approach to social innovation, I came up with the following unique features which have been highlighted by different scholars and practitioners. Social innovation is a contested concept with different meanings as well as analytical and normative definitions, so you might find a diversity of approaches and understandings out there. Social innovations are social in terms of both their ends and their means. They create social value in addition to or instead of an economic one. The Lebanon Cooperative is an example of in addition, and the Norwegian Trekking Initiative for Migrants is an example of an instead social innovation. A social innovation is considered an implementation of a new idea with the potential to improve the quality of life, which may include aspects of education, social welfare, social cohesion, and environmental quality. Community-driven social innovations contribute to life satisfaction and happiness. What an important message. Now that the narrow picture of social innovation has become a bit clearer, it is time to challenge you a little further, zooming out and trying to understand the big picture, the setting in which social innovations appear. What factors influence are key to the success of social innovations in rural areas? I think this video, again by CIMRA, is really good to understand the processes and structures behind social innovations. It is a little challenging, but I am sure you will recognize much of what is said from your own work and involvement in rural community development. Again, click on the slide and access the video online. Enjoy it! Hi again! Let those reflections and analytical frameworks sink in a bit. Maybe watch the video once again later throughout the course. Well, that was the first module of our course on fostering rural community resilience, introducing relevant basic concepts for grasping and applying rural community resilience in theory and practice. We introduced our diverse rural background in Europe, the hopefully now less fuzzy concept of resilience, neo-endogenous development, community-led local development, and social innovations. Before you continue with your self-learning, take a look at your assignment number 1 and the preparatory information for our tutorial on the 20th of September at 6 p.m. Central European Summertime. Regarding assignment number 1, this will allow you to reflect on the contents of week 1, the key concepts. Please write a short essay of 500 words with a plus minus 10% tolerance, that means from around 450 to 550 words, reflecting on the following questions. Tell us about one or more rural communities you are involved in or know of. How do your communities of reference promote or assert their resilience? Or how could they if it's not happening yet? Based on your experience in rural community development, what factors enable or are responsible for a higher level of resilience in a rural community? What factors limit or can be considered as barriers for building resilience in rural communities? Remember, 5 assignments of your choice will be handed in for evaluation, corresponding to 50% of your overall marks. What I am really excited of is our upcoming tutorial on the Wednesday, the 20th of September at 6 p.m. Central European Summer Time. It will be the first time that you as participants come together in an interactive setting. That is why we would like you to dedicate some time for you and us to get to know each other, as well as discussing content of week 1, clarifying your questions and identifying your expectations for the course. We would like you to introduce yourselves, answering to the following questions in a maximum of 1.5 minutes, 90 seconds. What is your name? What country, region, and locality village do you come from? And what is your professional background and how is it related to rural development, or rather to this course? If you prepare an answer beforehand, it will make it easier for you if English is not your first language, and it will help you keep in the limit of 90 seconds. For further 2 questions, also prepare answers of maximum 90 seconds. What are your points of contact to the resilience of rural communities up to now? And what are your expectations for the course? Is there anything special you would like to bring up or learn about during the course? After the introduction, we will provide time to ask questions and clarifications arising from the first week and the basic concepts. We are also interested in your feedback. Did you enjoy it? What could be improved? Finally, and hopefully with enough time, we will split up into smaller groups and discuss examples and experiences from your own context and biography. At the end of the slide set, you will find all references used throughout week 1 basic concepts. Additionally to the already recommended sources, you can also have a look at these. If you have any questions arising from this webinar session, you can send me an email to this address before and after the tutorial. You can write to me in English, German, or Spanish language, and I will try to get back to you as soon as possible. Many thanks for attending the first week. I hope it was informative and entertaining for you, and I am looking forward to meeting you during the next tutorial. Goodbye!